Hi, this is Dan Wolfson with Pragmatic Data Research. I'm also a member and maintainer of the Egeria open source project. Egeria is an extensible system that helps organizations integrate tools and systems through bilateral managed exchange of metadata. It helps you to build an open and automated data governance environment that adds value to the tools that you already have and use. Today, I will show you how to use Egeria to manage a basic business glossary. We'll do a little overview of glossaries, introduce Egeria workspaces and the environment around that with Hey Egeria, and then jump into showing how we can use Hey Egeria to work with basic glossaries. Finally, we'll do a bit of a recap and I'll show you some of the other material that you can review. Business glossaries help organizations to codify and exchange knowledge through the definition of terms and how those terms can be organized in different categories and across different glossaries. You can link those terms to other elements, such as table columns, reports, or analytic and AI models. There are many styles of business glossary to serve different kinds of communities and purposes. Many organizations have business glossaries, and often they have several of them. Egeria can be used to integrate glossaries and the relationships to terms. In this video, we'll focus on basic usage, but Egeria provides a rich set of capabilities in this area. And you can read up on these capabilities on our website, as you can see here. This particular page is showing much more detail about the anatomy of a business glossary, but you can find a lot more information as well. Today we're going to be using the command line interface that we've built for Egeria that's called Hey Egeria. I did a previous video on this, and so you can review that. We'll put in a note in the notes at the bottom of the video here. The environment that we're going to use uses Egeria workspaces. And again, there'll be another video on Egeria workspaces to take this into depth. But very simply, at the end of the day, Hey Egeria and what we're going to be doing today just uses a terminal interface. And it can be any terminal interface that has Hey Egeria installed. Okay, let's get going. With Hey Egeria, we start the commands by just doing Hey Egeria space TUI. And if we bring that up, it gives us a menu or forms-based system. And you can see that we have a number of different areas and categories that have glossary functions in them. And so we can start by doing this function, which is really in the catalog section, show glossary glossaries. And we don't need to give it any parameters. By default, we'll look at all glossaries. And so we can click this close and run button, or we can do Control R, and it comes back and it gives us a list of the glossaries that it already knows about. Pretty simple. So if we go back, we can also do the same thing with glossary terms. So terms live within glossaries. And so we have an option here. We'll just take the defaults on this first one, then we'll come back and play with this a little bit more in a second. So we'll take the defaults, and it shows us a much bigger table. And it gives us a little colon down at the bottom because this is a paging interface. And so if we hit spacebar, it'll skip to the next page. We can go backwards by using the B command. And we can do searches with the slash command. And so we can say /CO2, and it'll highlight all the areas that have CO2 in them, any place in them. Basically, this is the same syntax and the same usage pattern that you would have in the Linux more or less commands. We type Q to quit. Okay, so let's go back to Hey Egeria. What we're going to do is we're going to explore a little bit more about the life cycle of a glossary. And so we had these show commands that ask Egeria to show us information, but we also have tell commands. And what you see here is that the first tell command that we're showing is called create glossary. And so we can just go ahead and fill out the form and create a glossary. We can create a new glossary and we can say video demo. The language is English. Description, we'll put in a new description here. We just had a default. A simple description for the video demo. And we can say what the usage is. Again, it's an optional field, but we can type something in and we can just say demo. And the rest are just defaults that we can just work with We talk more about this in our Hey Egeria video. So now we can do Control R to go submit this, and you can see that it went ahead and created a new glossary with a particular ID. Now, when we have a glossary, you can see the glossary has a name, it has a qualified name, has a language description and usage that we've already seen, and the unique name is really an internal computer-oriented name, whereas the qualified name is a little bit more human readable, but again meant to be unique and distinguishing. So if we go back and we go to Hey Egeria again, and we look at our glossaries, we can now see that we have our video demo here. And now we have this GUID just like we had above. Okay, pretty good. If we go back to Hey Egeria, you can see that we could also delete the glossary. And if we wanted to delete the glossary, then we have to provide that GUID. And so we have to remember what that GUID is. So we can go back over here and we can do Hey Egeria TUI. Just doing this in another window so that we can keep track of these things. And now you can see here's our GUID, and we can go back to our first window, paste that in, and that's all we need to do. And now if we go back and we look at our glossary, you can see that it's gone. Okay, so we can do some basic lifecycle management here. Let's take a deeper look at terms as well. So if we do Hey Egeria TUI, TUI stands for Textual User Interface. Let's go back and recreate that glossary. So go back, create the glossary, video demo for the demo. The usage was for demo. We created that. Hey Egeria TUI. And now let's take a deep look at the terms. So what you can see here is we have different parameters that we can put in. We have a search string, either a glossary GUID if we know that, or a glossary name. And if we don't provide either of those, then we'll search all of the glossaries for the particular terms. And in this case, if a term is, it says, if this is an asterisk here, then it's all terms. And so we'll just leave it again at all terms and run that. And you can see that each term, for each term, has a term name, a qualified name in GUID, just like we saw with glossaries, an optional abbreviation, such as you can see CO2 here is a useful abbreviation, a summary description, a longer form description, an optional version ID, what glossary this is in, and then the status. And the status is used to manage the life cycle of a term. And then an optional example. So if we wanted to create a new term, and we wanted to put it into video demo, we do Hey Egeria TUI, and we go down to say create term. And now we have fill out the form. So we can say demo term, glossary name first, video demo. Now the term name, which is demo term. And this is the summary. This is just a simple demo term. And a description. We could just say a longer description can go here. And that's all we really need to do. In fact, some of these are also optional. We could just do Control R, and you can see that we just created this term in glossary video demo. And so now if we go back and we look at our terms, but now let's just look at the terms in video demo. And you can see that we have the term that we just created, just as expected. Pretty simple. But it can be tedious to put in each term one at a time. So we have another way to do this, which is that we can import and export terms using a CSV file, formatted file, and import the terms. Here's an example. Let's take a quick look over here. What you can see is that in our work area of Jupyter, and really this is part of Egeria workspaces, we have an area that's called loading bay, and then a directory under that called glossary. And this is meant to be an area where we can put in CSV structured files of glossary information that we want to load into Egeria. And so if we take a look at, let's say, pets on terms, double click that, and what it shows us is that we have a header row, just like you would expect in a CSV file, term name, qualified name, abbreviation, summary, and so forth. And each of those is a header for a column. And then we have each row with a full row of information with that's comma separated. So the term name is soft purr, loud purr, rumble, and hiss are the term names here. You'll notice that all of the files end in .om terms, and that's just our own convention. Because CSV files can be anything, it's useful for us to have a naming convention that helps us to understand that this file really is about open metadata terms. So let's go back to Egeria, and our glossary name that we want to put these terms into is video demo. File name is pets.om terms. And the file path is home/jovian/loading bay glossary, and that's really right where this is. Now, this file path is set by an environment variable. The default is set by an environment variable, so you can change it to anything you want, as long as it's reachable by Egeria. I'll show you a little bit more about this later on. You'll note that we have a couple of other options. One is verbose and one is upsert. Verbose asks Egeria to provide us some output that shows us which rows were input and any errors that occurred. Upsert we'll talk about in a few minutes. So let's close and run this. And what you can see is here's our verbose output, and it gives us a little JSON structure for each row that it tried to import. And we can see that the first row had term name, just like we saw in the file. It created a new qualified name for it, and that's the qualified name. So we have a little convention of creating the qualified name with glossary term colon and then the term name and then timestamp at the end. And then here's the GUID that was created by Egeria to point to that term. We can see that soft purr and loud purr worked just fine, but these two didn't. This term says that there was an invalid term status. So if we take a look for the moment at Egeria again, and we look at creating a term by hand, one of the things that we glossed over a little bit was this status attribute. And that status attribute can be one of these values: draft, active, deprecated, obsolete, or other. By default, when we create a new term, we're setting it to draft. But there can be a workflow that would allow a steward or other knowledgeable user to go through and review the terms before publishing them as active terms. And so what this was telling us over here is that there was no term status set. And in fact, if we go and we look at this, we can see in the file that draft was set here. We can see that the case doesn't matter, but there was no status set over here. And so it was missing that information. And so that's why it kicked it out and rejected those two rows. So if we wanted to fix this, which you can do, you can just use an editor and add draft to the end of that. Now that we've loaded this in, we would expect to see two terms that show up. So let's make sure that we see them. Do glossary terms. We can say the glossary name is video demo. And there you go. We see the demo term that we originally created, loud purr and soft purr. Very good. But you know, this demo term up here doesn't really make any sense if we're going to be creating a glossary about cat noises. So let's take a look at what it would take for us to remove it. So let's delete that term. Now, you'll also have noticed that when we run this Egeria TUI, it's actually creating for us, as we fill out the form, this command line. And so if we just copy that command line and repeat it down here, it's going to do that without us having to go through and fill out the form again. So we want to get rid of demo term. Now, we're going to need to know GUID for that. So I'm going to go and select that. Now we can go Egeria TUI, and now we can tell Egeria, we want to delete this term, and the term GUID is the one that we just selected. And that's all that we have to put in. Say run this, and now you see that the term's gone. So we can do some very basic lifecycle management on the terms. Finally, we can show how to export terms. Again, we open up Egeria TUI, we click on Export Terms. You can see that there's a default that we need to remove, and we need to replace that with the correct glossary GUID. So we go over here, we can type Egeria cat show glossaries, just I remembered what the magic command was here. And there's our video demo glossary. Go and highlight that, copy it, nip back over here, put in our glossary GUID. Now we need to give it a file name, so we might as well say video demo export.om terms. And if you remember, we suffix things with om terms as part of our convention. File path is already set correctly because it picked it up from the environment variable. Now we can run that, and you can see that we exported 2 terms from this glossary into this file. And if we open it up, then we can see those 2 terms. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is that in the qualified name column, when we did the export, it pulled out the qualified name from Egeria, and so now it's in our export file. And this is useful because using the upsert capability, that option that I pointed out earlier, if a row has a qualified name filled out, then we can update that term that's represented in that row, and Egeria will pick it up. And if there is no qualified name in that column, then Egeria will insert that row into the glossary. And so that's an easy way for us to do a bulk import of changes that we want to make. Okay, so let's review. What you can see is that we've covered most of these commands. We really walked through the life cycle of both glossaries and glossary terms. We've created terms, create glossaries, delete terms, export terms, import terms. And so we can do the basic life cycle management. Now, there's more documentation available on GitHub. And if you look at, go to the Egeria Python repo, and then pyegeria commands doc glossary basic tui.md, and that has a good description of what we've gone through today. So, with that, I will wrap it up. There's a lot more that we can talk about with glossaries and with terms, a lot more capabilities that Egeria provides, but we'll have to do that another time. Thanks for listening. Would enjoy any feedback you have. Bye now.